I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Today we're reading from the book of Psalms, chapter 22, and let's focus on verses 1 through 10. My God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from helping me and from the words of my groaning? Oh my God, I cry in the daytime, but you do not hear, and in the night season, and am not silent. But you are holy, enthroned in the praises of Israel. Our fathers trusted in you. They trusted, and you delivered them. They cried to you and were delivered. They trusted in you and were not ashamed. But I am a worm and no man, a reproach of men, and despised by the people. All those who see me ridicule me. And they shoot out the lip, and they shake their heads, saying, He trusted in the Lord. Let him rescue him, and let him deliver him, since he delights in him. But you are he who took me out of the womb. You made me trust while on my mother's breasts. I was cast upon you from birth, from my mother's womb. You have been my God. Psalm 22, verses 1 through 10. It is a fairly common occurrence that whenever I discuss the idea of the Messiah with a Jewish non-believer, in order to get the conversation started, I propose perhaps some ground rules, right? They try not to speak from the Talmud. I know it's hard, right? This collection of extra biblical, rabbinical opinions. And then I, for the most part, won't speak from the New Testament. Every now and then you have to go there, but let's just kind of keep it toward the Old Testament, or the Tanakh, as they would say. And after all, if Jesus is the Messiah, which he is, then he should be clearly seen throughout the Tanakh, throughout the Hebrew Old Testament. Fair enough, they say, and then off we go. But it never fails that whenever I read Isaiah 53 and I read Psalm 22, that Jewish non-believers, right, people that don't believe in Jesus, they say, stop, you said that you aren't going to speak from the New Testament because you're obviously talking about Jesus. At which point I simply turn the Bible around and I show them that King David could describe the Messiah, Jesus, and the acts around his crucifixion and his resurrection. King David described them more clearly hundreds of years before Jesus' crucifixion than their rabbi can see him today, 2,000 years after the fact. And one of the most misunderstood statements that Jesus made from the cross was, my God, why have you forsaken me? So let's consider this psalm in its entirety. Then we'll understand why he quoted it. Or as Adrian Rogers said, Jesus was not quoting Psalm 22. Psalm 22 is quoting Jesus. Often, so-called experts put forth that in the midst of the trauma and the crucifixion, that Jesus sort of lost his mind and he stammered in his faith. He lost sight of the goal. Why is this happening, right? I overheard and then quickly corrected one non-believing Israeli tour guide who was teaching a group of Christians. He's teaching a tour group, and he says every prayer that Jesus prayed, God answered except for his selfish prayer. You see what he did there? He said that the cup would be removed from him in the garden. And then the tour guide continued and he says, and then Jesus caught himself and he goes, nevertheless, thy will be done. And he says, and even on the cross, that Jesus was unsure of God's deliverance and he asked, why have you forsaken me? Well, let me say that guide was not at all happy when I stepped in to give the proper biblical understanding of that passage. He wanted me to go away. But the problem was, he was on our tour bus. So what did Jesus mean when he asked why? Why have you forsaken me? Well, first we have to ask, what is the subject matter of this psalm? Because the Messiah is bearing the sin of the world on behalf of both Israel and the world. He makes the confession of all who would stand in God's judgment in the last days. And if their sin were not atoned for, they stand in having been judged by the Lord. And those who believed that they were saved apart from having received Messiah's atonement. So they were religious perhaps, but they had never surrendered to the truth of the gospel. And Jesus is making their confession. Why? Jesus was not confused, nor did his faith falter by saying these words. He was quoting a psalm, which was a psalm about himself. And not only was it about his unjust punishment, but also he was making a statement concerning the hope of his resurrection. So anyone who knew the first part of the psalm, my God, why have you forsaken me? Well, then they knew the rest, right? Psalm 22, verses 21 through 24. You have answered me. I will declare your name to my brethren. In the midst of the assembly, I will praise you. You who fear the Lord, praise him. All you descendants of Jacob, glorify him and fear him, all you offspring of Israel. So what is Jesus saying when he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's almost like, hey, why don't you guys go back and look up, Psalm 22? And the fact that they didn't know what he was saying, right, meant that even the culture of that day, that the people did not know the Bible to the extent where they would say, oh, he's quoting Psalm 22. But we know how Psalm 22 goes. It's not just a why have you forsaken me, but it's like you will defend me and then you'll raise me up from the dead and I will declare you to all my offspring. So he wasn't just talking about his crucifixion, he was also talking about his resurrection. Consider these things when you think about, now, have I truly surrendered to the gospel? Because if not, well, then I may stand before the Lord and say, yeah, I think I'm good with God. God's good with me. And then he says to you, as Jesus says in Matthew 27, turn away from me, I never knew you. And then what would your answer be? We'll go back to Psalm 22, verse 1. My God, why have you forsaken me? Just as true as salvation is, also the judgment of God. There is one way, but that one way is made open to you if you would only take it. If you want to know more about the gospel and how to surrender to Jesus, how to know that you're saved, well, you can go to our website, groundworksministries.com. There's a very clear explanation, not only of what the gospel is, but you can be led through a prayer where you can speak to the Lord yourself and surrender to the gospel. You can be saved today. I'm Steve Wiggins, and this is the Groundworks Ministries podcast. Now, Groundworks Ministries operates entirely through financial donations from faithful people like you. And your giving to Groundworks Ministries transforms lives. Would you consider making a donation to Groundworks Ministries today? Because we need your monthly support now more than ever. You'd be amazed at how far even $20 a month will go. Donating is secure and it's easy at our website, groundworksministries.com. Now, another way to help is to tell people about Groundworks Ministries. Share these podcasts with your friends and your family and on your social media. And of course, you can always direct folks to our website, groundworksministries.com.